Although the comic book nerd space of media is currently dominated by a wide selection of Marvel properties, X-Men was the first to break into the mainstream. It cemented itself into the cultural zeitgeist of the 90s and early noughties. And during this hype cycle, the bright minds of Raven Software out in Wisconsin determined it was time for an X-Men dungeon crawler RPG. Admittedly, very novel, and they did pretty damn good. But I do have some reservations about it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The main reason I'm making this retrospective is because I don't feel anyone else has really done it justice. There are retrospection videos, but they all feel very surface level in the writing and observations they make. None of the other videos actually pick apart how busted parts of these games are. I want to cut deep. And this is a complete aside, there's this one video by Always Nerdy. I recognized nearly every source he brought up regarding the game's development because they're just straight from the Wikipedia page, which I'd been reading prior to viewing. Nothing wrong with Wikipedia, it's just funny to me that he never bothers to mention it.
Wasn't able to find the cost for its development, but it ended up selling around 800,000 copies while earning roughly $28 million in the US over the next couple years.
Those are some suspiciously specific numbers to know offhand. I wonder if, yeah, he plagiarized it. They're just straight from the Wikipedia article. Control F is not that complicated, guys. It's really easy to find this shit.
You're not even interpreting the Wikipedia article correctly. It clearly says the figure is just Xbox sales. I'm sorry, but you're a hack. Anyway... X-Men Legends moved forward into development in 2001, with Patrick Lippo leading the project. I know this thanks to an excellent interview of Patrick Lippo, hosted by the Power of X-Men podcast. This interview was a great source for much of my insight into this game's development, so I'm really happy that niche podcasts like this exist. I will be citing back to this podcast frequently, because there's so much here I never saw anywhere else during my research. So, thanks, Dayspring, for actually having the balls to email people. I certainly don't. During initial planning of the game, the team's vision was originally a much more hardcore RPG experience, taking primary inspiration from the likes of Final Fantasy VII. But as development progressed, the team steadily started leaning more towards a real-time combat system.
JRPG style was pretty alien to a lot of the people in the company, and it just didn't feel right. And I think we all just wanted to kind of get in and make, tap our action roots and make a game that was really something that we, built on our strengths.
Under this system, players would be able to dynamically swap between members of their X-Men team. This team could consist of any 4 of 19 different X-Men, at least according to the Game Informer article released during development. This cast of 19 was trimmed down to 15 characters. According to Patrick, the cut characters were Marrow and Havoc, who remained in the game as bosses, Bishop, who only makes a cameo as a child, and Angel, who is nowhere to be seen except for this Game Informer article. Raven Software clearly had a lot of ambition going into this project because the cut content didn't stop at just a few characters. There was originally an intention to have an entire 4th act set in the post-apocalypse following Asteroid M's plummet into the Earth, but this was cut entirely, with the catastrophe instead being diverted in the game's conclusion. What remained was still hundreds of dungeon areas for players to descend into with their superpowered teams. As you may have noticed, this game is highly stylized with its cell shading. Many saw this as an art choice, but according to Pat, this design had much greater importance for the gameplay.
These characters were, maybe an inch tall on your TV or something like that. So that led to a lot of decisions that we made along the way. You see it from that angle. Everything turns a little bit into blobs. So it's got to pop off the ground. You kind of got to know what each hero, who each hero is, right, by looking at them easily. So they need a really strong silhouette. The outline really just made those characters just pop off the ground, because otherwise we would have had to almost have like the world's simplest floor, right, just so you could see the characters, right? And the problem with any game where you're looking down at
As for the audio side of this game, the music was under the direction of Rick Schaefer, and the identity of this music was punchy. Almost to a fault, the music in this game is incredibly same-ish. Every action track is going to have a bass synth and a straightforward drum groove. That's not to say I don't enjoy the soundtrack though. Despite the repetition, the tracks still do a fantastic job of getting you amped up. and the relaxed tracks offer pleasant reprieves. My favorite is definitely the Sentinel Lab theme. That heavy chug with the angelic sounding piano melody layered on top is genuinely incredible. In addition to the rhythmic sounds, Raven managed to gather an excellent voice cast, even bringing in Patrick Stewart to reprise his role as Professor Xavier. And it isn't just a small amount of dialogue. Xavier is fully voiced for every line.
The people who attacked you in New York City were members of the Brotherhood of Mutants. They can be extremely dangerous.
Also, this game marked Steve Bloom's first performance as Wolverine, and he's managed to keep rocking that role for the past 20 years.
Hey bub, you should have called in sick today.
This game also features the talents of John DiMaggio, whom I'm a massive fan of.
Where's Xavier? Where's my half-brother? Tell that runt Kane Marcos come home to bring the pain.
The game was released after a few years of development on September 21st, 2004 on Xbox, PS2, and GameCube. You may say, hold on there, Pidge. That was 21 years ago, not 20. Listen, bud, this game still can't legally drink, and multiples of 10 are much nicer than multiples of 7 or 3. I'm not changing the title, shut up. Regarding the title, you may have also noticed that I totally ripped off Racevick's years later naming scheme. I have no regrets, and if you want it back, you'll just need to Venmo me. The game begins with a news broadcast depicting mutant-human relations. Just a typical X-Men fanfare. In New York, Allison Crestmere, a mutant, is abducted by the government and then re-abducted by Mystique and Blob from the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Wolverine takes to the scene to save the day and is the first playable X-Man in the game. Although this is a 4-player dungeon crawler, it starts off as 1 player, then 2 30 minutes later after picking up Cyclops, and finally 4 players maybe an hour into the game. Throughout the game, there are several interludes and missions where the game is once again single player. It is not a consistent multiplayer experience, despite being marketed as such. Thankfully, Raven recognized this after the fact, and this glaring issue is amended in all future installments of the series, such that all players are always in. Back to Wolverine, the first level is excellent for familiarizing yourself with the controls, and it has a great level of polish between the subway lava flows and city streets. The control scheme is quite straightforward, with all combos being some variation on the A and B buttons. The most simple combo, Triple A, is a simple 3-piece and is essentially useless. Double B gets a bit more action by knocking enemies back and dealing extra damage if enemies knock into each other or walls. Aside from the pathetic 3-piece, all combos immobilize enemies and help to control space, which helps to add some dimension and color to fights that could have otherwise been boring slugfests. There is no block button, there is only space control. How well you control space will determine how difficult your game is, at least early on before your character's powers get ridiculous. ABA knocks enemies prone through tripping, ABBB is another knockdown, BABB stuns foes, and AAB uppercuts enemies into the air. Pop-up is especially fun because you can jump up to continually punch them on their way down or just outright slam them downwards. Although the different combos may not have much difference in their effects, they are fun to play around with and feel really good. There's a generous input buffer, so timing is never much of a concern. You can also press X to directionally throw enemies, which are great for environmental kills and in some cases gives you absolute euphoria from throwing enemies through walls. Environmental destruction feels amazing and is one of the greatest parts of the game. You can also throw items in the environment at enemies, but it doesn't have good damage scaling, so you'll find yourself doing it less and less as the game progresses. Why throw a crate for 20 damage when I can get an optic blast critical hit for 800? There are a lot of damage scaling issues in this game, and throwing is just the tip of the iceberg. I'll expand more on that later. Whenever in combat, you must manually manage your health with healing potions. This isn't some cool addition to the X-Men canon, it's just D&D healing potions with a dedicated button on the controller for spamming them. It's kinda dumb. Tanking a heavy blow and then spamming the heal button isn't great. In the Ultimate Alliance game that comes out a few years later, they scrapped this concept entirely in favor of enemies dropping healing orbs whenever you defeat them. Now you don't have to waste time spamming a button, and you're rewarded for dispatching foes. Enough said. On a final note, you can hold down the trigger to access your mutant powers, which cost energy points and generally follow patterns of A and B being attacks, X being a buff, and Y being your extreme move, which is just a different attack, but it's associated with a different limited resource, so it's cool, I guess. I'll delve more into powers later because there's so much more to say about them and how dumb this game can be because of them. Because this is an RPG, there is of course experience points and level ups. Whenever you level up, you get a skill point to put into your mutant powers or passive buffs like crit rates or extra damage, as well as an attribute point to put into either striking, agility, body, or focus. Body gives you 10 extra health, and focus gives you 7 extra energy points and a faster regeneration of those points. These are well explained. They make sense. I like them. Striking increases your attack, and agility increases your defense. What does that mean? I don't know. These aren't well explained. Let me check the manual. Okay, so these are magic values. What's your assumption? What do you think these values do? A flat increase to how much damage your attacks do and flat decrease to how much damage you take would make sense, right? Wrong. This game does armor classes, and it never tells you. I know this for certain because of Patrick Lippo's dev blog. A failed attack roll is deemed a weak hit, with almost no effect in an unsatisfying thup sound. This can also be seen in a Game Informer article in the graphic labeled, "You won't land every hit." Thanks. I wish you would have said that in the game itself. If your attack isn't high enough and the enemy has a high enough defense, you will do 0 damage. I learned this firsthand as my tank Colossus, with whom I spent all of my points into agility to make him indestructible as he should be. He struggled to land any hits on Sentinels. However, this armor class calculation is only taken into account on physical strikes, not ranged or beam attacks. So even if you have a high agility, you get no benefit because of how many enemies are ranged attackers. There is no damage reduction in this game, only damage negation. And it doesn't even work! Agility is a dump stat for all of your characters. In addition, many X-Men in this game have upgrades that imbue their physical attacks with extra psychic or energy damage. Attacks with these upgrades also bypass the strike calculation and always hit! In other words, half the cast in this game doesn't need any points in strike, and the game doesn't communicate this! Why is it like this? Why'd they make it like this? Who the fuck? Dear Patrick Lippo, some of your design decisions have brought me great frustration. Therefore, I have delivered a bomb to your residence. In the modern world, this is the only way to enact true justice. This is a stupid bit. Where were we? New York, right. After traversing the streets, smacking around Mystique and blasting Blob, Allison is safely extracted back to the X-Mansion. I am conflicted about Allison. In the context of the story, she serves the vital purpose of being the newbie to the team, the blank slate through which we learn about the universe, mirroring Jubilee in the X-Men TV show, or Wolverine in the X-Men film. This kind of character is important, especially for people who aren't already familiar with the X-Men canon. There's lots of things to know about the characters' relationships and history. Originally, Raven intended to have a build-your-own X-Men system for the protagonist, but
in the end, Marvel wasn't interested in having us have that feature. We chose Magma as that character.
However, this is a multiplayer game, so X-Men Legends uniquely has a protagonist that is mostly absent throughout the game's runtime, unless you choose to have her on your team. Which I don't. Her abilities are mid as fuck. Thus, the level of connection you actually feel to your own protagonist is loose and incredibly fleeting. You only play her during interludes between missions, and interludes are just interruptions to the game I actually want to play. The first interlude between the first and second mission is the only one I considered fun and excusable because it's your first look at the fully explorable in-game X-Mansion, and the lore dumping is actually kind of fun for a bit.
He was the very first X-Man, and he's the team leader.
Oh yeah, I remember him. He's kinda cute.
And he's kinda spoken for.
Oh, I didn't mean to.
My favorite part of exploring the X-Mansion is meeting Forge, because his display picture is oddly familiar. All interludes following don't have the same appeal and drag out for far too long. In one interlude, they put Allison in the danger room to relive her experience in New York, aka you have to play the entire opening verbatim all over again. But is Allison this time? Reusing locales and texture sets for areas is reasonable for development costs. You know, returning to the Morlock tunnel tile set on several occasions is, it's fine. In contrast, making the player completely retread old ground without any modification is dumb. Ew. Gross. Why would you do that? Don't do that. Thankfully, they completely removed her from the series following, and she is never seen again. Thank you, Patrick. After the first interlude, the X-Men travel to Alaska, and gameplay opens up a lot more in comparison to the first level. The first notable addition I would like to address is Forge. At extraction points, you are able to enter Forge's little shop to buy or sell gear. I always found the gear in this game to be rather unremarkable. Oh hooray, I can get an additional 2% crit rate, or 4 to 5 points of damage reduction. It's not that the gear isn't technically helpful, but its effects are mundane and can't really be felt in the game. I never had any moment of excitement crying, "Holy shit, this drop is gonna make my character so much stronger!" Maybe I missed something, but it never really affected my game too much, aside from slight speed boosts for my brawlers. That's fine, I guess, that's pretty cool. The Alaska level also introduces some of the game's first puzzles. At least, that's what the developers refer to them as in the behind-the-scenes materials.
Puzzles. To solve your puzzles. Those puzzles. Puzzle solving.
In truth, it's Icemen being able to put out fires and build ice bridges. I don't think these really match the definition of puzzle. Fun fact, Jean Grey can also build bridges, but you didn't know that because the ability description doesn't say that she can. Although these environmental interactions end up being fairly limited in the game, I at least appreciate the consideration that was put into it. Now, this game has a reputation for being difficult, and I'm not surprised as to why. If you aren't precise and strategic with your leveling, your characters can very quickly become underpowered and get completely crushed due to lacking in damage potential. Wolverine's damage output quadruples if you just put 2 points into his brutal slash. It doesn't help that the auto-leveling function in the game is actually brain dead and will put your points into places they shouldn't go. There are also many alluring upgrades, like flight, but if you want strong characters to make their way past the difficulty spike that is the Alaskan ice tunnels, you really should invest in your power moves. The fact that something that is fun, but not very useful, is tied to skill points is very lame. Although this isn't changed in Legends 2, in Ultimate Alliance all character traversal abilities are available by default, which is a welcome change. Despite all of this talk of difficulty, I'm gonna go against conventions here and say that this is not a hard game. I mean, obviously it will be very hard if you level up improperly. A good example of improper leveling can be found in the hilariously named review video, "This X-Men game is impossible!" made by Godzilla Mendoza. Did you really think I was done dissing YouTubers? It's clear to me he wasn't considerate of his level up, seeing as how at level 6, his Cyclops only did 9 damage with an Optic Blast, indicating that he didn't upgrade the attack past level 1. With proper leveling, he could be doing triple the damage.
Yes, I found it difficult because I played a little recklessly at the start of the game. No, this does not mean my intelligence and moral integrity are in question.
Buddy, where did you spend your points? I don't understand. What the hell did you upgrade? Did you forget to level up? Alright, I didn't notice this until I started editing. I think he actually may have forgotten to level up. I'm not joking. Ordinarily, you wouldn't be able to unlock both the B and X specials at level 5. They both cost 2 points each, and you get 2 points at level 5 for allocation. He must have saved up points from previous level ups to get both the B and X specials, which both suck Mega Balls when you first unlock them, leaving him, like, ridiculously underpowered. I don't know how you fuck up this bad. It's actually impressive. To be fair to this guy, at least this review is fun and well edited, and it doesn't pretend to be authoritative and well informed when it isn't. Unlike some people I know. As I was saying, this isn't a hard game. That is, if you're using the correct characters. Some are very good, others are almost unusable. Jean Grey, without contest, is the most busted character in the entire game, and by a decent margin. She can solo most levels in the game. As I wrote that line into the script, I initially thought I was being a facetious dickhead, so I then went to the Morlock tunnels and soloed them. Her telekinesis move is already rather strong, throwing enemies quickly, controlling space, and smothering them with damage, but she also has a buff that by later levels adds hundreds of points of damage to her psychic attacks, giving her ridiculous DPS potential. Her B radial burst move is also excellent because it slows down all enemies around her. She also has a powerful personal shield as a cherry on top, not that you'll ever need to use it. The tank characters, meanwhile, like Colossus or Rogue, have quickly diminishing returns because they lack damage upgrades like the rest of the cast. They don't have the energy or psychic buffs. They can invest a lot in striking to do physical damage that is somehow still less than the rest of the cast at expense of having no energy points, or they can invest in focus to spam specials as a sort of poor man's crit build. However, this isn't ideal because all of their specials are slow and laggy. They have nowhere near as much potential as energy attack critical hit builds or Nightcrawler's crits. Cyclops, for example, can absolutely shred bosses with his quick-fired beams, trivializing fights that would ordinarily be much more intense. While some characters like Jean Grey and Cyclops are ridiculously powerful throughout the game, some characters are completely unviable early on, only reaching their full potential in the late game. And by some, I mostly just mean Nightcrawler. At level 7, his A mutant power, after upgrading it 4 times, can only do 12 to 15 points of damage. For comparison, Wolverine does double that, at level 1. By level 7, he can potentially deal 10 times the damage as Nightcrawler. Nightcrawler's passives don't increase damage at all, so he's useless like Rogue and Colossus early on, but he can increase crit rate, I guess, for his 15-point attack. He can also get a double jump and increase his agility. P.S. I have delivered a second bomb. By about level 25, only after fully upgrading crit rates, Nightcrawler can reach viability by pumping all points into Teleport Flurry, which sends out multiple attacks, all while invincible, and all with a crit rate of 25%. Ideally, characters should be playable throughout the whole playtime instead of the last quarter of the game. They amended this issue in the sequel by giving him swords and making his animations look fricking sick. Leveling discrepancies don't end with just Nightcrawler. There are so many baffling design decisions for level ups. For example, Wolverine has a buff that gives him +5 agility. And a 30% speed boost for 15 seconds, which is pretty nice, at a cost of 60 energy points. If you decide to level it up, it's still 30% speed boost and +5 agility, but the boost lasts 1 second longer. Sounds useless, right? It gets worse. Energy cost increases to 70. It is a downgrade. It's just a downgrade. And Wolverine, like... why? What the fuck? Cyclops has a buff that increases his striking and agility. He is built to be a backline fighter and spam lasers, so striking doesn't make sense, and agility never worked in the fucking first place. Emma Frost has a psychic buff to her physical attacks. At level 5, its range is 50 to 63 points of added damage. At level 6, it is also 50 to 63 points of added damage. I'm not sure how a mistake like this got shipped. Her moveset is kinda lame, so maybe the QA testers just didn't fuck with her and forgot to check. Or maybe they just forgot to level up like Godzilla Mendoza did. This isn't even a problem with any one character in particular. The level scaling for B specials is universally terrible. The B moves are only unlocked by the time your character reaches level 5, and they cost 2 points to unlock instead of 1. However, by this time, your A move can already reach level 3, and because of the scaling, the B moves are ridiculously weak at unlock. Therefore, putting points into it is a complete waste and will leave your characters underpowered. For example, Cyclops' Optic Sweep does only 4 to 5 points of damage at unlock, at a high energy cost, relative to his A move doing 25 to 31 points of damage if you invest in it at level 5. It would be much wiser to use your 2 points at level 5 to go to level 3 of the Optic Blast and invest the other point in a passive like Crit Rate, Point Blank Shot, or Leadership. Thankfully, this issue is fully addressed in X-Men Legends 2. Whenever a new move is unlockable, it only costs 1 point, and it's already scaled to have damage appropriate for the level it is unlocked at. My final issue with the powers in this game is how they render every other option obsolete by the late game. They do so much damage in comparison to the standard attacks, and energy replenishing pickups are so plentiful that there is no penalty for just spamming moves to eliminate enemies. For stronger enemies like bosses and sentinels that can't be knocked back by standard attacks, it is clearly optimal to spam. The first few levels are primarily brawls with occasional power use sprinkled in for good measure, while the remainder of the game is mostly just holding forwards with powers. Unfortunately, Legends peaks in Alaska, because you can just fully turn off your brain past level 10. I really could go on and on about the design of these characters, but this script is already getting longer than final papers I've written for classes. If there's enough interest in it, I may make a more niche video where I pick apart the characters one by one, because there's a lot to pick apart, but for now, I'll leave the stat comparisons there. As you may have noticed, I've been sort of skimming over the story, speaking of it in the loosest terms possible. I'm doing this for two reasons. Firstly, I really hate retrospectives that take the time to recount every single story beat. It's really just a matter of personal preference. I can't stand it. Secondly, the story in this game is a bit bad. Raven brought on the writing team Man of Action to make a riveting story and script the X-Men game. These guys are pros. Their career is writing comic stories, but they had a crucial restriction. In this game, your X-team can consist of any 4 members. So any interaction in the world has to be generic enough to apply to any of the 15 playable characters. That hurts. The most interesting story beats are when the team selection is pre-selected, like the opening, Cyclops meeting his brother Solo, or the Psychic team's trip to the astral plane. The allure of the X-Men franchise is the fantastic characters and their unique interactions, but when the script must be generic by necessity, those nuances are really hard to inject. Whenever there's a mission briefing cutscene, characters actually get to interact with each other, and they even have banter.
That's a trait you two share in abundance.
You get funnier by the day, furball, you know that?
It's so genuinely charming and shows off the writer's talents. But in the standard context of the game, you only get to see the X-Men interact one-on-one with Allison or generically with NPCs. It doesn't do it for me. In addition, this is a video game, not a comic. I played this game multiple times, even just for this video, and I struggle to remember the story beats. This game tries to implement a lot of twists and turns into its plot, which I'm sure would work great for a comic, but it doesn't translate directly to a console very well. There is so much noise going on between focusing on multiple storylines, and the gameplay, and how the hell am I supposed to make Beast viable? The plot gets drowned out. There's animated cinematics, dialogues, environmental storytelling. I almost wrote that there was no in-game cutscenes, but that's not true. There's one. Just one. Here it is. Look at this dynamic camera work. It looks great. This doesn't appear anywhere else in the game, and I'm completely lost as to why this happens only once. This game is linear, but it doesn't feel like a line as much as it feels like an incoherent scribble. With any journey, there is an understandable progression from point A to point B. There may be diversions on the trail, but there is at least a reasonable progression through space. X-Men Legends lacks this entirely. For reference, the first levels are New York, Alaska, and the Morlock sewers. All of these levels have absolutely no relation to each other plot-wise. As I was writing this script, I couldn't for the life of me remember why the hell you go to Alaska in the first place, and after reviewing the footage because Wikipedia sure as hell wasn't going to tell me, the game doesn't tell you. You know the Brotherhood is there for something, but once you get to the end and defeat Toad, he doesn't know either. And this level isn't elaborated on until later. It was for Magneto's location in captivity, that's it. This level takes an hour, and the purpose of the excursion is only elaborated on in one sentence after completing a different, completely unrelated level, which was also irrelevant to the greater plot. I don't like this storytelling, but it's okay, because I just turn off my brain, and I have a little bit of fun with Cyclops. X-Men Legends holds a special place in my heart, despite all of my gripes. Its balancing was poor enough that players were either completely crushed or breezed through it. I was the former as a boy, and the latter as a, well, slightly older boy. And even despite this, it is remembered by many as excellent, and I'm not one to disagree. I just also believe that it was merely the somewhat rocky opening to a truly fantastic series. Thanks, Pat. I'm truly sorry about blowing up your house. I hope we can still be friends. Hey there, a little bit of a post-credit update. I'm planning on being a lot more involved on YouTube this year, so expect more in the future. Subscribe and all that nonsense. I've also set up a Patreon, so check that out. I don't have anything specific planned for subscriber benefits yet, but I'm open to suggestions if anyone joins. That's about all. Have a good one.